On Mother's Day, my millionaire son visited and asked, "Are you enjoying the $2,000 a month, Mom?" I was baffled and replied, "Son, the church is helping me get by." It was then that his ambitious daughter-in-law opened the door. "I'm so glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you are watching me. That way, I can see how far my story has reached." The doorbell rang at exactly 3 p.m, just as it always did when Richard came to visit me. 63 years of living in this same house had taught me to recognize the sounds that announced important visitors. And today was Mother's Day. I hurried to the door, wiping my hands on the apron I always wear when I cook. I had prepared a pot roast, my son's favorite dish since he was a little boy. The aroma filled the whole house, mingling with the scent of gardenias I had cut from the garden to decorate the table. "Mom," Richard hugged me with that perfect smile he'd always had, the same one he used as a child when he'd done something he was proud of. He wore an expensive suit, the kind that cost more than I spend in 3 months. His shoes shone so brightly I could see my reflection in them. "My dear son, it's so good to have you here." I kissed his cheek, noticing the scent of his expensive cologne, so different from the simple soap I use. Come in. Everything is ready for you." Samantha entered behind him, as she always did. My daughter-in-law wore a white dress that surely cost more than my rent for 6 months, and her perfectly manicured nails held a bouquet of expensive flowers as she gave me a hug that felt cold, mechanical. "Happy Mother's Day, Alice," she said, with that sweet voice that had never completely convinced me. There was something in her eyes that always made me uncomfortable, as if she were constantly calculating something. We sat in the living room, the same one where Richard had played as a little boy, where he had studied for his college exams, where he had announced he was going to marry Samantha 5 years ago. The furniture was old, but well cared for, each cushion in its exact place, every surface clean, even though I no longer had the money to buy the cleaning products I used to use. "Mom." Richard settled into the main armchair, the one that had belonged to his father before he passed away 10 years ago. "I have to ask you something important." His tone changed. He was no longer the affectionate son who had just arrived. Now there was something serious in his voice, something that made my stomach knot. Samantha sat beside him, but I noticed she was very quiet, quieter than usual. "Tell me, son, you know you can ask me anything." Richard looked me straight in the eye, with that intensity he had inherited from his father. "Are you happy with the $2,000 I send you every month, Mom?" The world stopped. $2,000 a month. The words echoed in my head like distant bells I couldn't quite understand. I felt as if the air had become thicker, harder to breathe. "What did you say, son?" My voice came out weaker than I expected. "The $2,000 a month, Mom. I've been sending it to you religiously for the last 8 months. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable, that you don't lack for anything." Richard smiled with pride, as if expecting me to tell him how grateful I was, but I didn't understand. $2,000 a month. If I had received that amount, my life would be completely different. I wouldn't have to go to St. Joseph's Church every Tuesday and Friday to pick up groceries from the food pantry the sisters organize for seniors in need. I wouldn't have to count every dollar before going to the market. I wouldn't have to ask Mr. Johnson, my neighbor, for help when the utility bills piled up. "Richard," I said slowly, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "Son, I haven't received any money from you." The smile vanished from his face immediately. "What do you mean you haven't received any money?" "Mom, I send you $2,000 on the 15th of every month. Samantha is in charge of delivering it to you personally." My eyes moved to Samantha automatically. She had been very still throughout the conversation, but now her face had changed completely. She no longer had that calculating expression. Now she looked frightened. "Samantha comes here every month," Richard continued, looking at his wife. "She tells me you two chat, that she gives you the money, and that you're always very grateful." I felt as if a deep pit had opened in my stomach. Samantha did visit me, yes, but not every month. Maybe once every 3 or 4 months, and they were always short, uncomfortable visits where we barely talked about superficial things. She had never, ever given me any money. "Son," my voice was trembling now, "your wife has not given me any money. I live with the help of St. Joseph's. Every week, I go for the groceries the sisters organize, and when a bill piles up, I have to ask for help from my neighbors or the parish." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at Samantha with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes had hardened, like when he was a boy and discovered someone had broken something valuable, and he was trying to figure out who it was. "Samantha," he said, in a voice that sounded dangerous. "What's going on here?" Samantha shot up from the armchair. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she tried to force a smile. "Oh, Alice, I think you're a little confused. Don't you remember our visits? We always chat for a bit, and I leave the envelope with the money on the kitchen table." But I knew perfectly well that wasn't true. My memory was perfect. I could remember every detail of every day. Desperation began to grow in my chest, like a caged animal wanting to get out. "No, Samantha, that's not true. You haven't given me any money. If I had received $2,000 every month, my life would be completely different." Richard stood up slowly. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. Samantha practically ran to open it, as if looking for any excuse to escape the conversation. When she opened the door, I was surprised to see Sister Carmen from St. Joseph's Church. She was an older woman, about 70, who coordinated the assistance program for families in need. "Good afternoon, Alice. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm here to bring you this week's groceries and to remind you that there's a meeting tomorrow to organize next month's collection drive." Sister Carmen came in with a grocery bag full of basic products: rice, beans, oil, a few cans of tuna. It was exactly the kind of help a person with no regular income would need to survive. Richard looked at the bag. Then he looked at Sister Carmen. Then he looked at me. His face had completely changed. There were no more doubts in his eyes, only a cold fury that reminded me of his father when he discovered a lie. Sister Carmen, unaware of the drama unfolding, continued speaking. "Alice is always so grateful for the community's help. It's a blessing to be able to support our elders who live on limited resources." Samantha was frozen by the door, holding the doorknob as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Richard closed his eyes for a moment. He took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, the fury had been replaced by something worse: utter disappointment. At that moment, I knew that something fundamental had changed forever in my family. The truth had come to light, but the price of that truth would be higher than any of us could imagine. Sister Carmen left after dropping off the groceries, never knowing she had just witnessed the moment that would change everything. The atmosphere in the living room had become so thick, it felt like the air itself was heavier. Richard stood in the middle of the room, looking back and forth between Samantha and me, as if we were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Samantha," my son said in a voice I had never heard before, a voice that was frightening. "I want you to explain exactly what is going on here." Samantha was still by the door, her hand on the knob. All the color had drained from her face, and I could see tiny beads of sweat forming on her forehead, even though it wasn't warm. "Richard, honey, I think your mom is confused. You know how older people can be sometimes. They forget things." Her voice sounded shrill, desperate. Those words hurt me more than any physical blow. Confused? I forget things? I, who remembered every dollar I spent, every favor I received. Every day I had to choose between buying medicine or food. "Samantha," I interrupted, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "I am not confused. I have not received a single dollar from my son in these 8 months. If I had, I wouldn't be living on the charity of the church." Richard walked over to his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out his smartphone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, in the way he clenched his jaw. "We're going to sort this out right now," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "Here are all the transfers." He came over to me and showed me his phone screen. There they were, one after another, 8 transfers of $2,000 each, all directed to an account that, according to him, was mine. "See, Mom? It's all here. October 15th, November 15th, December 15th. He continued reading the dates, but I couldn't focus on his words because something terrible was growing in my chest. "Richard, son, I don't have that bank account. My only account is the one I opened 20 years ago at the local bank, and I only have $300 in it." Richard stopped cold. He looked at his phone screen. Then he looked at me. Then he turned his gaze to Samantha. She had started backing toward the door, like a cornered animal looking for an escape. "Samantha." Richard's voice was now a dangerous whisper. "Whose bank account is this?" "Me?" "I don't know what you're talking about, honey. There must be some mistake." But Richard was already dialing a number on his phone. I could vaguely hear someone's voice on the other end, probably from the bank. "Yes, I need to verify the information for an account. Yes, I can provide my identification. It's an account I've been transferring money to." The conversation lasted several minutes. During the time, Samantha and I remained silent, but I could feel her eyes on me. When I finally looked at her, I saw something in her expression that sent a chill down my spine. She no longer looked scared. She looked angry, as if I were the one to blame for what was happening. Richard hung up the phone and stood still for a moment, his eyes closed. When he opened them, I realized my son had changed forever. "The account is in the name of Samantha Miller." He said it in a voice so cold it seemed to come from winter. "My wife has been receiving the money I thought I was sending to my mother." The silence that followed was absolute. You couldn't even hear the birds in the garden that usually sang all afternoon. It was as if the whole world had stopped to witness this moment. Samantha finally let go of the doorknob and walked to the center of the living room. But instead of looking defeated, she stood up straight and looked at me with an expression that froze my blood. Fine. Yes, the money went to my account, but it's not what you think. Richard approached her with slow, deliberate steps. It's not what we think? Samantha, that money was for my mother. Where is it? I was saving it for her, she lied shamelessly. I wanted to save up a large amount before giving it to her, so it would be a nice surprise. I have all the money saved. But I knew that wasn't true. I had seen how Samantha's lifestyle had changed in recent months. The new dresses, every time I saw her, the jewelry she didn't have before, the new car she had supposedly bought with savings from her job at the boutique. Show us the money, Richard said. It's at the house, in our safe. We can go get it right now. Richard nodded, but then he looked at me. Mom, do you want to come with us? Richard and Samantha's house was in an expensive, upscale neighborhood, full of large houses with perfect lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. I had always felt uncomfortable there, as if I didn't belong in that world, but today, that discomfort was different. Today, I was afraid. When we arrived, Samantha led us to Richard's study, where they had a safe built into the wall. With trembling hands, she entered the combination and opened the metal door. Inside were some important documents, some jewelry, and a white envelope. Samantha took the envelope and handed it to Richard. Here is all of your mom's money, the full $16,000. Richard opened the envelope. There was money inside, but as he counted it, his expression darkened even more. There's only $3,500 here, Samantha. Well, I had to use a little for household expenses, but I always planned to replace it before giving it to your mom. It was in that moment that I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about trust, about family, love. Samantha had taken the money my son sent me with such care and had spent it on herself while I was eating, thanks to the charity of the church. Household expenses? Richard practically roared. Samantha, that money was for my mother. My mother has been living in poverty while you spent her money on your clothes and your whims. Richard, calm down. I can explain everything. But Richard wasn't listening anymore. He had walked over to the desk and opened a laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard with a controlled fury. I'm going to check all of our bank accounts, Samantha. I'm going to see exactly what my mother's money was spent on. At that moment, I saw Samantha's face change completely. The mask of the perfect wife fell away entirely, and what was left was something cold, calculating, and without remorse. Do what you want, Richard, but remember that I am your wife. Your mother won't be here forever, but I will. Those words stabbed me like daggers. Not only had she stolen my money, but now she was threatening me, reminding my son that he would have to choose between us. And at that moment, as I watched my son frozen between his mother and his wife, I knew the worst was yet to come. The days that followed that terrible afternoon felt like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Richard didn't speak to me for a full week, an entire week, without hearing my only son's voice, without knowing if we could ever repair what had been broken between us. When he finally called, his voice sounded tired, as if he had aged years in just a few days. Mom, we need to talk. I'm on my way. He arrived alone, without Samantha, which gave me a small glimmer of hope. Maybe he had made the right decision. Maybe he had seen the truth clearly. But when he walked into my house, his expression told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't coming as my repentant son. He was coming as a man who had made a difficult choice. Mom, sit down, please. His tone was formal, distant, as if I were a client in his office and not the woman who had carried him for 9 months. I sat in my favorite chair, the rocker where I used to sing to him as a baby, where I had spent entire nights when he had a fever, where I had listened to his problems as a teenager. Now it felt like I was sitting on the witness stand. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, Richard began, avoiding my eyes, and I think there are things you need to understand. Tell me, son. My voice came out smaller than I'd hoped. Samantha made a mistake. Yes, but she's been under a lot of pressure lately. Her job at the boutique hasn't been going well, and she thought she was doing the right thing by saving the money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Saving the money while I was eating beans from the church pantry? Richard, son, she spent the money on clothes, on jewelry. She wasn't saving it for me. Mom, I understand you're upset, but Samantha is my wife. She's the mother of my future children. I can't just abandon her over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. That word hurt me more than any insult. My son was calling the fact that his wife had stolen from me and left me to live in poverty for 8 months a misunderstanding. Richard, it's not a misunderstanding. It's theft. It's lies. It's betrayal. Mom, that's enough. His voice had hardened. Samantha has explained everything. She was scared to tell you she had the money because she thought you'd be angry if you hadn't asked for it directly. She didn't know how to handle the situation. And that's why she bought new dresses. That's why she got a new car. Richard sighed deeply, as if I were a stubborn child who didn't understand adult matters. Mom, some of those purchases were necessary for her job. She has to look professional. And the car, well, her old car broke down. Every word out of my son's mouth broke me a little more. I could see that Samantha had worked on him, that she had planted doubts about my version of the story, that she'd found an explanation for every one of her lies. And what about the missing money, Richard? We only found $3,500 of the $16,000 you sent me. Samantha explained that she had some medical expenses she hadn't told me about. You know, Katsi. Female things. But she's going to pay it all back gradually. I fell silent for a moment, processing what I had just heard. My son had chosen to believe his wife's lies over his mother's word. He had decided it was easier to think I was exaggerating or confused than to accept that he had married a thief. Richard, I finally said, do you really think I would lie about this? Do you think I would make up a story like this? For the first time in the conversation, he looked me directly in the eyes. And what I saw there broke my heart. I saw doubt. I saw my son wondering if his 63-year-old mother was losing her mind, if I was inventing stories out of spite or jealousy toward his wife. Mom, I don't think you're lying, but I think that maybe things aren't exactly as you remember them. Those words were like a slap in the face. My own son was doubting my sanity, my memory, my honesty. Samantha had managed to plant the seed of doubt, and that seed had grown into a tree that now separated us. All right, Richard. I stood up from the rocker, suddenly feeling very old, very tired. If that's what you think of your mother, then there's nothing more to talk about. Mom, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be fair to everyone. Fair? My throat sounded bitter, hollow. Is it fair to let your wife steal the money you send me while I eat thanks to charity? Is it fair to doubt your own mother's word? Richard stood up too, but he didn't come near me. He stayed on the other side of the living room, as if there were an invisible wall between us. Mom, Samantha has agreed to pay you back the money gradually. We're going to set up a different system for the transfers. Everything will be fine. No, Richard, it won't be fine. I walked to the window, looking at the garden where he had played as a boy. Your wife stole from me and humiliated me, and you are choosing to protect her instead of defending your mother. It's not like that, Mom. I'm not choosing anyone. I turned to look at him one last time. Yes, son, you are choosing, and your choice is very clear. He stood motionless for a moment, as if waiting for me to say something more, to give him permission to leave with a clear conscience. But I had nothing more to give him. I love you, Mom. I'll always love you. But Samantha is my wife, and I have to protect my marriage. And I am your mother, Richard. But it seems that doesn't mean anything anymore. He left, without kissing my cheek, without hugging me, without looking back. I watched him walk away through the window, get into his expensive car, and disappear around the corner. In that moment, I knew I had lost something more than money. I had lost my son. The following days were the darkest of my life. Richard didn't call. He didn't visit. He didn't answer my texts. It was as if I had died to him, as if the 63 years of unconditional love I had given him had been erased from his memory. But the worst came when I started hearing the gossip. Mrs. Martinez, my neighbor across the street, told me she had seen Samantha at the supermarket complaining to her friends about problematic mothers-in-law who make up stories to get attention. Mr. Johnson, who had helped me so many times with the electric bills, told me he had heard rumors that I was losing my memory, and that's why there were problems in the family. Samantha had started a quiet but effective campaign to destroy my reputation. She didn't attack me directly, but she planted doubts about my mental stability, my version of events, my ability to remember things correctly. And the most painful part was knowing that Richard was probably hearing those same stories at home, that every night Samantha was reminding him how confused his mother was, how difficult I was to deal with, how it would be better for everyone if we kept our distance. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the patio, I saw a car pull up in front of my house. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking it was Richard coming to apologize. But when Samantha got out, alone, all hope vanished. She was dressed in new clothes again, carrying bags from expensive stores. She walked up to my door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Alice. Can we talk?" I let her in, more out of curiosity than politeness. I wanted to hear what new lie she had come to tell me. "I came to bring you this," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "It's $500. It's part of the money I owe you." I took the envelope, feeling the thickness of the bills inside. It was real money, but somehow it felt dirty in my hands. "I also wanted to apologize to you," she continued, sitting in my living room as if she owned the place. "I know I made mistakes, but I want you to know it was never my intention to hurt you." "Was it your intention to steal from me?" "Don't call it stealing, Alice. It was a misunderstanding, a bad decision. But Richard and I have talked, and we're going to make things right from now on." I sat across from her, studying her face. There was no real remorse there, no genuine guilt, only calculation, strategy, the satisfaction of someone who knows they have won. "What do you really want, Samantha?" Her smile grew wider, colder. "I want us to have a good relationship, Alice, for Richard's sake. He's very stressed with all this conflict, and I just want us to be a happy family." "A happy family, Aichi?" I repeated. "How can there be a happy family when it's built on lies?" "They're not lies, Alice. They are different perspectives of the same events. And I think it would be better for everyone if we just let the past be the past." In that moment, I completely understood what was happening. Samantha hadn't come to apologize or make peace. She had come to set the rules of the game. She was telling me she had won, that Richard was on her side, and that my only option was to accept her version of events if I wanted to maintain any kind of relationship with my son. And if I don't agree, to let the past be the past. Her smile vanished for a second, and in her eyes, I saw a glint of something dangerous. "Well, Alice, that would be your decision. But Richard is very loyal to the people he loves, and right now, the person he loves most in the world is me." She stood up, smoothed her expensive skirt, and walked to the door. "Think about it, Alice. Do you really want to lose your son over pride?" When she left, I remained sitting in my living room, holding the envelope with the $500. It was a small fraction of what she had stolen, but it was also something more. It was the price she was offering me for my silence, for my dignity, for accepting to live in a world where her lies were worth more than a mother's truth. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I realized that maybe I had already lost my son forever. 3 months passed like an eternity. 3 months without hearing Richard's voice, without a text, without a call, without even a word through a third party. Nothing. It was as if my son had decided I no longer existed, as if the 63 years of unconditional love I had poured into him had completely evaporated. The $500 Samantha had given me ran out quickly. I spent it on medicine for my blood pressure, which had started to rise since this whole problem began, and on some urgent house repairs. The water heater had broken, and Mr. Johnson, my neighbor, had helped me fix it, but I had to pay him for the materials. I went back to depending completely on the church's food pantry. Every Tuesday and Friday, I would walk the 6 blocks to St. Joseph's Parish, stand in line with other elderly women and families in need, and receive my bag with rice, beans, oil, and a few canned goods. Sister Carmen always greeted me with a genuine smile, but I could see the growing concern in her eyes. "Alice, are you sure there's no way your family can help you more?" she asked me one Tuesday afternoon while checking the list of pantry beneficiaries. I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a nun that your only son has abandoned you because he prefers to believe the lies of his thieving wife? How do you tell her that you've lost not only the money, but also the love and respect of the only family you had? It's complicated, Sister Carmen. My family is going through a difficult time. She nodded with understanding, but didn't press further. She was a wise woman who had seen many sad stories in her years of working with the community. The greatest humiliation came on a Thursday afternoon. I had gone to the market with the few dollars I had, trying to stretch the money to buy some chicken to supplement the beans from the pantry. I was at Mr. Thompson's butcher shop, where I had shopped for years, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Alice." I turned and saw my friend Mercedes, a woman I had known from Richard's birthday parties when he was a boy. She was the mother of one of his elementary school friends, and though we didn't see each other often, we had always maintained a cordial relationship. Mercedes, how nice to see you, I said, trying to sound natural, as Mr. Thompson wrapped my small purchase of 1/2 pound of chicken. Oh, Alice, it's so good to run into you. I recently saw your daughter-in-law, Samantha, at the new mall. My stomach tensed immediately. Oh, really? Yes, she was shopping in those super expensive stores. She was carrying bags from boutiques I couldn't even dream of entering. She looked beautiful, very elegant. Mercedes smiled, but there was something in her eyes that made me nervous. We chatted for a bit, and she told me that Richard spoils her rotten, that he gives her everything she wants. How nice, I murmured, paying Mr. Thompson for my chicken. But she also told me something that worried me a lot, Alice. Mercedes's voice had become more serious, more intimate. She said that you've been a bit confused lately, that sometimes you forget things or make up situations that didn't happen. I felt as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped on me. What exactly did she say? Oh, Alice, I don't want to get involved in family problems, but she said that sometimes you accuse people of things they didn't do, that Richard is very worried about your mental state, that they are considering taking you to a specialist. Mercedes's words felt like stab wounds. Samantha had not only stolen from me and convinced my son I was crazy, but now she was spreading that lie throughout the neighborhood, destroying my reputation with people who had known me for years. Mercedes, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Do you really believe I would make up stories? She looked at me with an expression that was half pity, half discomfort. Oh, Alice, I've known you for many years, and you've always been a very level-headed woman. But age sometimes does strange things to all of us. My own mother, in her final years, sometimes said things that made no sense. I am not senile, Mercedes. Of course not, dear. But maybe, just maybe, it would be good to talk to a doctor, right? Just to put the family at ease. I left the market feeling like I was carrying an enormous weight on my chest. Not only had I lost my son and been robbed by my daughter-in-law, but now everyone in the neighborhood thought I was losing my mind. That night, sitting in my rocking chair, looking at the photos of Richard I had in the living room, I realized how completely alone I was. I had no living siblings. My parents had passed away years ago, and the few cousins I had lived in other states. Richard had been my only real family, my only purpose, my only reason to keep going after his father died. And now I had nothing. The days turned into a mechanical routine of survival. I would get up, do the housework, watch a little TV, cook with what little I had, and go to bed early to save on electricity. The weekends were the worst because that's when Richard used to visit, when my house was filled with laughter and life. One Saturday morning, I was watering the plants in the garden when I saw a familiar car park in front of my house. My heart raced because I thought it was Richard. But when the door opened, Samantha got out, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was an older woman I didn't know, very well dressed, with expensive glasses and an air of authority that immediately put me on alert. Samantha approached the door with her usual fake smile, but the woman with her looked at me with an evaluating expression, as if I were a lab specimen. Hello, Alice. I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Vega. She's a specialist in, memory issues in older adults. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. A doctor? Yes, Dr. Vega intervened with a professional but condescending voice. Your daughter-in-law has told me about some worrying episodes you've had lately. Confusion, memory loss, unfounded accusations, toward family members. I haven't had any episodes of confusion, I said, feeling rage building in my chest. Mrs. Miller, the doctor consulted a notebook she was carrying. According to your family, you've been accusing your daughter-in-law of stealing money that never existed, of inventing visits that did happen, of creating family conflicts based on imaginary situations. That's not true. My voice came out louder than I expected. Samantha did steal from me. She stole the money my son sent me. The doctor and Samantha exchanged a look that made me feel like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. Mrs. Miller, the doctor continued, denial is very common in these cases. Patients with early cognitive decline, often. I do not have cognitive decline, I yelled, completely losing control. Samantha is a thief and a liar, and she has convinced my son that I'm crazy. Alice, please calm down, Samantha said in a soft voice, acting as if she were the victim of an out-of-control old woman. See how you get? This is why we're worried about you. The doctor quickly jotted down notes in her notebook. Aggression, paranoia, persistent accusations toward family. Yes, we definitely need to run some tests. I don't need any tests. I need my son to stop believing this woman's lies. Mrs. Miller. The doctor closed her notebook and looked at me with an expression of false compassion. I understand this is difficult for you, but your family only wants to help. There are medications that can help with these symptoms. Get out of my house, I screamed, no longer able to hold back tears of frustration and rage. Both of you, get out now. Samantha and the doctor left, but before getting into the car, I heard the doctor say to Samantha, there are definitely clear signs of deterioration. I'll write up a report so you can begin the legal process for a conservatorship, if necessary. Those words froze my blood. A conservatorship. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent so that Richard and Samantha could completely control my life. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced through the house, looking at every corner, every object that had witnessed the life I had built over 63 years. My house, where I had raised Richard, where I had cared for my husband until the day he died, where I had lived every important moment of my life. And now they want to take everything from me, based on the lies of a woman who had robbed me and manipulated my son into abandoning me. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something stronger than sadness and despair. I felt a cold, calculating anger growing in my chest, like a fire that had been dormant for too long. I was not going to let them declare me crazy. I was not going to let Samantha win completely. And I was definitely not going to let them take my house and my dignity without a fight. But to fight, I needed weapons. And for the first time in months, I began to think like a woman who had survived 63 years in this world, not like a helpless victim. The war was just beginning. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was making my chamomile tea. The phone rang with an insistence that signals something important is about to happen. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something inside me told me to answer. Mrs. Alice Miller? The voice was that of a young, professional man. Yes, this is she. My name is Robert Castillo. I'm an accountant. I work for your son Richard at his company. Could I come see you this afternoon? It's very important. My heart started beating faster. Is everything all right with Richard? Your son is fine, ma'am, but I need to talk to you about some irregularities I found in the accounts. That afternoon, Mr. Castillo arrived at my house with a thick folder full of documents. He was a man in his 40s with a serious face and glasses that gave him a very formal air. But when he looked at me, I saw compassion in his eyes. "Mrs. Miller, what I'm about to show you may be very painful, but I believe you have a right to know." He sat in my living room and opened the folder on the coffee table. Inside were bank statements, copies of transfers, and reports that I didn't fully understand, but which clearly showed movements of money. As your son's accountant, I have access to all the company and personal accounts he manages through us. A few weeks ago, Richard asked me to review the transfers he has been sending to you. He asked you to do that? Yes, I think he was starting to have doubts about what his wife had told him. Mr. Castillo pointed to a series of numbers on the paper. These are the transfers from the last 8 months, $16,000 in total, sent to an account in the name of Samantha Miller. I already knew that. Yes, but what you didn't know is what happened next. He turned to another page. Look at these movements. Every time the money arrived in your daughter-in-law's account, she immediately transferred it to another personal account she has at a different bank. My breathing became more agitated. Another account? A secret account that your son didn't know about. And look what that money was spent on. He showed me a long list of purchases: designer clothes, jewelry, beauty treatments, trips, and even payments on an apartment she's renting downtown. An apartment? Why would Samantha want an apartment? Mr. Castillo looked at me with a very serious expression. Mrs. Miller, I believe your daughter-in-law is planning to divorce your son. The apartment is in her name. She has been accumulating personal assets and moving money to accounts that Richard can't touch. I felt as if the world had stopped. Does Richard know this? Not yet. I just finished the investigation last night. But there's more. He pulled out another set of documents. I also found that she has been using your son's corporate credit card for personal expenses. In total, she has embezzled almost $50,000 in the last 2 years. $50,000, an amount I couldn't even imagine while I had been eating charity beans and asking for help to pay the light bill. Mr. Castillo, are you going to show this to Richard? Yes, ma'am. In fact, I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning. But I wanted to talk to you first because I think you're going to need support when all this comes to light. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, thinking about everything Mr. Castillo had shown me. It wasn't just that Samantha had stolen from me. She had been stealing from Richard too, planning to abandon him after bleeding him dry financially. And the worst part was knowing that my son had been defending a woman who was betraying him in the cruelest way possible. The next day, around noon, I heard a car screech to a halt in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw Richard getting out of his car, his face completely devastated. He came running towards my door, and I knew he had already spoken with Mr. Castillo. When I opened the door, my son looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. His eyes were red, his clothes were wrinkled, and in his hands he held the same folder Mr. Castillo had shown me the day before. Mom. His voice was broken. Forgive me. Please, forgive me. He fell into my arms like he used to when he was a little boy having nightmares. He cried on my shoulder for several minutes while I stroked his hair as I had done thousands of times during his childhood. Mom, you were right about everything. Samantha Samantha is not the woman I thought she was. I led him to the living room and poured him a glass of water. He looked shattered, completely broken. Mr. Castillo showed me everything this morning. The bank statements, the transfers, the secret apartment, the credit cards, everything. He ran his hands over his face. Mom, she's been stealing from me for years. Not just from you, from me too. Where is she now? I don't know. When I got home this morning after the meeting with Castillo, she was gone. She took all her things, emptied the safe, and left this. He showed me a handwritten letter. The handwriting was elegant, neat, but the words were like poison. Richard, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Our marriage was a mistake from the beginning. You never gave me what I deserved. You always put your mother before me. I'm leaving with someone who knows how to appreciate me. Don't try to find me. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I'm filing for divorce. Samantha, with someone else? I asked, though deep down I already suspected the answer. Yes, Mom. It seems she's been seeing another man for months. The apartment she rented wasn't for her alone. Richard broke down again. Mom, I was an idiot. I defended her to you when you were telling me the truth. I doubted my own mother for a woman who was lying to me about everything. I hugged him, feeling him tremble in my arms. Richard's son, she manipulated you. That's what people like her do. But I should have known better. You're my mother. You've known me since before I was born. How could I doubt you? Because she was very good at what she did, son, and because you wanted to believe you had found true love. We held each other for a long time. For the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back. Not the man who had been defending a liar, but the boy I had raised with love and values. Mom, I'm going to fix everything. I'll give you back all the money she stole, with interest. I'll pay for any medical expenses you need. Richard, I interrupted him gently. The money isn't the most important thing. Then what is? The most important thing is that you learn from this, that you never again doubt the people who truly love you just because someone else tells you pretty lies. He nodded, wiping his tears. Can you forgive me, Mom? I forgave you the moment you knocked on my door, son. But as I hugged him, I knew that even though I had Richard back, the scars from these months wouldn't fade easily. I had lost trust in my son, lived in poverty, while my daughter-in-law spent my money on luxuries, been humiliated in my neighborhood, and nearly been declared mentally incompetent. The forgiveness was real, but I also needed Richard to understand that things couldn't go back to being exactly as they were before. This experience had changed us both, and the new relationship we built would have to be different. Richard, I said finally, there's something else we need to talk about. What is it, Mom? The doctor Samantha brought here. The report she wrote saying I was losing my mind. Richard's face darkened. Mom, that was Samantha's idea. She convinced me you were having memory problems, that you needed medical help, and you thought it was necessary to bring a doctor without consulting me. Richard lowered his head in shame. Yes, Mom, and I deeply regret it. Good, because that doctor filed an official report, and that report could have been used to take away my home, my independence, my dignity. Mom, I never would have let Richard, you already let Samantha control this situation for months. What guarantee do I have that you wouldn't have let them take my house too? We looked at each other in silence for a moment. It was a hard question, but a necessary one. Richard needed to fully understand the damage that had been done, not just by the stolen money, but by the betrayal of his trust. You're right, Mom. I have no right to ask you to trust me automatically after what happened. No, son, you don't. But you do have the chance to earn that trust back. He nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? First, I want you to go to that doctor and demand that she retract her report. I want it officially on record that there is nothing wrong with my mind. Done. Second, I want you to recover every single dollar Samantha stole. Not just what was mine, but everything she stole from you, too. I'm already working on that with Mr. Castillo. And third, I said, looking him directly in the eyes, I want you to understand that our relationship is going to be different from now on. I love you, Richard, but I will no longer accept being treated like a burden or as someone who can be so easily doubted. I understand, Mom. Do you really? Yes, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life showing you that I deserve your forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, searching for signs of genuine sincerity. What I saw was a broken man who had finally learned a very hard lesson about the value of true family. All right, Richard, we'll try. But as we hugged again, I knew that even though Samantha was gone, the consequences of her lies and manipulations would be with us for a long time. The difference was that now we would face them together as mother and son, and not as enemies separated by a stranger's lies. 6 months after Samantha vanished from our lives, reality had settled like dust after a storm. Richard had kept his promises. He recovered all the stolen money, had Dr. Vega officially retract her report, and divorced Samantha without a fight over any material assets. She had taken what she could and disappeared with her lover, leaving behind only debts and lies. But the most significant changes had nothing to do with money or legal documents. They had to do with us. Richard now visited me every Sunday, just as he had for years before marrying Samantha. But these visits were different. He no longer came as the successful son condescending to see his poor mother. He came as a humble man who had learned the value of true family in the most painful way possible. Mom, he said one Sunday as we ate the pot roast I'd made him, I've been thinking about something. What is it, son? Would you like to come live with me? The house feels so empty, and I think it would do me good to have you close. The proposal took me by surprise. Richard's house was beautiful, large, full of comforts I had never had. But after everything that had happened, the idea of depending on him again, even with the best intentions, made me uncomfortable. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine here in my house. But Mom, you could have your own room, a private bathroom. You wouldn't have to worry about expenses anymore. Son, I interrupted gently. It's not about the comforts. It's about my independence. I saw the confusion in his eyes. To him, after what had happened, the natural thing was for me to want the security of being near him, of being cared for and protected. I don't understand, Mom. Richard, during the months that Samantha was stealing from me and you had abandoned me, I learned something very important. I learned that I can survive on my own. I learned that I don't need anyone to take care of me, to have dignity. But I want to take care of you, Mom. I want to make up for everything I put you through. And I thank you for that, son. But the way to make it up to me is not by making me dependent on you again. The way to make it up to me is by respecting my ability to make my own decisions. Richard was quiet for a moment, processing my words. He had matured a lot in these months, but he still had a hard time understanding that I had changed, too. So, what do you want, Mom? I want us to be family, but as equals. I want you to visit me because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated. I want you to respect my decisions, even when you don't understand them. And I want you to never again doubt my word just because someone else tells you something different. I understand. Do you really? He nodded slowly. I think so. You want love, not pity, respect, not charity. Exactly. We established new rules for our relationship. Richard gave me a reasonable monthly amount for my expenses, but in my own bank account, under my total control. He visited every Sunday, but if I ever didn't want visitors, he would respect that. And, most importantly, he had promised that he would never again allow a third person to interfere in our mother-son relationship. The real test of these new boundaries came 3 months later, when Richard started dating a new woman. Her name was Elena, an elementary school teacher, divorced with an 8-year-old daughter. She was a simple, hard-working woman, very different from Samantha. But when Richard introduced her to me, I saw something in her eyes that put me on alert. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Miller, Elena said, with a smile that didn't quite convince me. Richard has told me so much about you. I hope good things, I replied, watching her carefully. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice small things. Elena always found excuses for Richard not to visit me on Sundays. We have plans with my daughter, or my family organized a get-together. Gradually, Richard's visits became less frequent. One Sunday, after not having seen Richard for 3 weeks, I decided to do something I had never done before. I called him. Son, can we talk? Of course, Mom. Is something wrong? Yes, something is wrong. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. There was an uncomfortable pause. Mom, it's just that Elena has had a lot of family activities, and she wants me to participate. Richard, I interrupted, do you remember the conversation we had about not letting third parties interfere in our relationship? Another pause. Yes, Mom. Good, because that's exactly what's happening again. No, Mom, it's not the same. Elena isn't like Samantha. Maybe not, son, but the patterns are very similar. She is gradually pulling you away from me, and you're letting her. Mom, she just wants me to get to know her family, to integrate. And what about your family, Richard? What about me? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Elena hadn't explicitly forbidden visits to her mother-in-law, but she had done something more subtle and effective. She had filled all of Richard's free time with activities that didn't include me. Mom, I don't want to fight with you about this. We're not fighting, son. We're having an honest conversation, and the conversation is this. If you want to have a relationship with me, you're going to have to make space for that relationship. If Elena can't understand that, then maybe she's not the right woman for you. Mom, that's not fair. Elena is a good woman. She may be, but a good woman for you should be someone who respects the relationship you have with your mother, not someone who tries to replace or minimize it. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely calm. I had said what I needed to say. I had set my boundaries clearly. Now Richard had to decide what was more important to him. 2 weeks passed with no word from Richard. 2 weeks in which I wondered if I had been too harsh, if I had lost my son again by being too demanding. But on the third Sunday, I heard the doorbell ring at 3 p.m. When I opened the door, I found Richard standing there, alone. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, son. Where's Elena?" "Elena and I broke up." I let him in without asking questions. I made coffee, and we sat in the living room, as we had done hundreds of times before. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Richard sighed deeply. I explained to her that I needed to maintain my relationship with you, that Sundays were our time. She said she understood, but then she started making comments about how I was a mama's boy, about how I needed to become independent from you. And what did you say to her? I told her that my mother had been there for me my whole life, that she had sacrificed everything to give me an education and a good future. I explained that respecting you and maintaining a relationship with you wasn't being a mama's boy. It was being a good son. I felt a warmth growing in my chest. And what did she say? She said I had to choose between having a serious relationship with her or continuing to be dependent on my mother. Richard looked me directly in the eyes. So, I chose. You don't regret it? No, Mom. I learned my lesson with Samantha. I won't let anyone else make me choose between love and loyalty. The right person for me will understand that you are a part of my life, and that's non-negotiable. We sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the coffee and the peace we had finally found. Mom, Richard said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you know you had to be so firm with me? How did you know you shouldn't let anyone else interfere? Because during the months we were apart, I learned something very important, son. I thought for a moment. I learned that it's better to be alone and have dignity than to be in company and be disrespected. Aren't you afraid of being alone? No, Richard, because now I know the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone is a choice you make to protect your peace. Being abandoned is something others do to you when they don't value what you have to offer. Richard nodded slowly. I think I learned that difference too. I hope so, son, because the next woman who comes into your life will have to understand that respecting me is part of respecting you. We kept talking until it got dark. Richard helped me wash the dishes like he used to when he was young. And before he left, he hugged me with the same intensity as when he was a boy. I love you, Mom, and I promise I'll never let anyone make me doubt that again. I love you too, son. When he left, I remained in my rocking chair, looking at the photos in the living room. Photos of Richard as a boy, photos of my husband, photos of a life built on love and sacrifice. I had lost money. I had lost time. I had lost my innocence about what people are capable of doing for money. But I had gained something more valuable. I had gained self-respect, clear boundaries, and a relationship with my son based on mutual respect instead of obligation or guilt. Samantha had thought that destroying my relationship with Richard would give her control over him and access to his money. But in the end, her betrayal had strengthened the bond between my son and me in a way that would never have been possible without that trial by fire. Now, when I wake up each morning, I don't do so as a victim of circumstances. I wake up as a woman who survived, who fought, and who won, not through revenge, but through quiet dignity and unbreakable boundaries. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights and prepared for sleep, was the best revenge of all. To live well, with self-respect, and with my son's love restored on terms that,